This is all part of Mayday. This is obviously what Mayday is going to be. This is the 1st of May. This is the rallying of the working people nationwide, listeners, that's going to be rallying at all points right throughout this nation. Lest we not forget the price that's been paid by the workers and what is ahead of us for the working people of this nation. What does Mayday offer the public and the people in terms of direction?
Firstly, from a historical point of view, it's the 125th year that Labor Day has been celebrated and observed here in Queensland. It's always a huge event. There's 30,000 people that march in Brisbane and probably 40,000 across the state. And why it's relevant today more than ever is it really represents a day in which the community can celebrate the fact that union values are community values. So those values of a fair go, of creating a better society, of giving a hand up to those that need it, and continuing, I guess, to push forward on the things that really keep working people up at night, things like jobs, things like health, education, public services, keeping our public assets in public hands, making corporations pay their fair share of tax, making sure that every kid, regardless of their parents' pay packet, has the opportunity to fulfil their potential in life. These are the things that we hold dear today as ever. The Turnbull government isn't just too close to big business. They're absolutely held captive by them. They're their, LNP members. They're their donors. Big business is the one that feed this government, and they are paying them back handsomely and in abundance.
On Skype, we must welcome Ros McClellan, and she's the General Secretary of the Queensland Council of Unions, known as the QCU. Welcome on board, Ros.
G'day, Sharon.
And here on my left, I've got Len Cooper, and he is the involved with the, of course, the Communications Workers Union, and has been actively involved, and is also a member of the Victorian Mayday Committee.
What the employers are doing day by day is forcing workers to work longer hours without overtime, sometimes longer hours without even getting paid. And so rather than hours being reduced in workers' interests and in society's interests, they're actually increasing. So it's very relevant today, and it should be debated a lot more.
About people being squeezed, about people's, blood, sweat and tears, their precious leisure time and family time being stolen. It was absolutely appalling for the Productivity Commission to insinuate that some workers' time with family and friends is worth compensating and others not. Townsville's unemployment rate overall is 7.1%, with youth unemployment nudging 20%. 237 workers have recently been sacked from Queensland Nickel. There are 580 meat workers who've been stood down for 4.5 months, the longest end of season shutdown for over a decade, at the same time as their jobs are literally floating by on ships in Townsville Harbour due to live exports. 160 rail jobs have been lost, 178 jobs at the Telstra call centre.
It wants to bring in the ABCC legislation against building workers, and I think it is important to re-emphasise what Ros has said. Part of the provisions of that Act are that workers don't have the right to silence, so if the inquisitors are after them and they don't want to tell them what happened in the meetings of the union members and who said what, they're not allowed to do that because they get automatic jail time for refusing that, or certainly they're charged for so they have no right to silence, and they have no right to a lawyer of their own choice. It's appointed for them by the state. So these are rights that are basic fundamental rights that criminals enjoy, but building workers are going to have that used against them. And I would argue, as a communication worker, that once that is in with the building workers, that will be flowed to other industries and other workers.
From the time of Mr Howard on, has been very much an attack on workers, has it not? How do you envisage, should a Turnbull government be retained, what can be expected of the working people generally?
Absolutely, the Turnbull government should not be returned. The main issue here, as far as Queensland unions see it, is jobs. That's secure jobs, it's decent jobs, It's jobs that are underpinned by a fair-minded industrial relations system. And the second issue, it's about making sure that corporations pay their fair share of tax to adequately fund the social agenda that affords universal, high quality and easy access for any member of the community to health, education, higher education, great public services and the like.
It's one of the reasons why this federal election is so important. We have to defeat the national government, the federal government, because all of those things will be intensified. The attacks on workers and the casual labour and so on will be intensified.
The ABCC means that building workers have got less rights than an ice dealer. Apparently that's okay if you're the Turnbull government, but try and call big corporations, banks, businesses to account, politicians to account, and watch them run screaming from that kind of public scrutiny.
Yes.
On the Melbourne Mayday agenda, the other things that the Melbourne Mayday Committee wants to emphasise this year is opposition to the phony free trade deals that the federal government is entering into, like the TPP. Even though the government's adopted it at the moment, it hasn't been adopted by Australia or the Australian Parliament and other parliaments of the world, so the pressure's being kept on. And we want to make this Mayday a protest against that. And then, of course, this year's the 50th anniversary of Pine Gap. So the issue of foreign bases in other lands and in Australia and an independent foreign policy is a big one on the Mayday agenda in Melbourne as well.
Stasi-type police
Right.
upon workers. This is not dictatorship-style conduct of a government.
If Sharon, if this is a window into the future of what Australia is like under a Turnbull LNP government, then I've got to say it's a pretty scary view. I mean, Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister, if he were to be re-elected, we really have to take a good hard look at ourselves and think, who are we?
But I want to thank you very much indeed for joining me today, listeners especially. And we need to be active, we need to be participants, we need to make our democracy work, and we need to assert our freedoms and liberties, and we need to assert them, particularly in this political and economic climate. And I've got with me at the moment Gerrit Sherrill-Halavka on my right, Dr. Ken Kogel from Monash University on my left, and I've got Matthew McGowan, who is the National Assistant Secretary of the NTEU. Gentlemen, let's look at it. We've got a government in crisis at the moment. We've got the Turnbull government pretty much on the run, attempting to, some would say, like railroad us into an election, an early election, brought on by a trigger, which is of course, the ABCC, a bash at the unions in order to bring on an early election. The social fabric is starting to play out with 2.5 million people in poverty. We're seeing 105 homeless on any one given night. These sorts of statistics we have not seen in Australia since we federated in 1901. And as a matter of fact, these are a large concern. As we're saying, the way forward is to really start to look at the inequality issues and answer the question, why have we got people in poverty? And we must see there, that, Matthew, the equation of jobs, employment. We're seeing too that people are having to work 3-4 jobs in order to just rake in enough to survive, and the cost of living. So, this is the bed of nails we've been cast upon, but the public are going to get off the bed of nails.
Frankly, union bashing is an old trick, and they have pursued it every chance that they get. Partly because it's representing their constituency, which is the big end of town, for whom regulation in the workplace costs them money.
And as Matthew's pointed out, when it comes to the case of TAFE, they failed spectacularly, and failed not only because they haven't delivered the nature and quality of services that the community needs, as well as the individual young people need, but they've also exposed the greed and avarice of the people who've been running many of these privatised operations.
And I think this focus specifically on giving draconian powers to focus in on a particular set of workers and their union is outrageous and needs to be resisted.
A colleague of mine at Monash University, Professor Graham Hodge, has pointed out that the effect of privatisation, in fact, is to cost the community more.
They have to be responsible to the people. We don't need that ministers now privatise everything to get away from the responsibility. But when something goes all right, the minister is there to make photo opportunities and kissing babies. We should say to the ministers, listen, you're getting paid to do a job, you better do it. And no longer privatisation. We have to get it back under the responsibility of the minister.
One thing that most people, I think, don't have a real deep understanding of how unions actually operate, and that's one of the problems that we've got. People don't understand that actually unions are a very democratic organisation. And the real question, and if they want to pretend or if they want to be seen to be treating seriously the issue of corruption, not only within the building industry and more broadly, would be to build in a broad-based anti-corruption body, as has been established in many of the states.
The change is occurring. We can see that there was mass change over the 2014 budget. There's mass reaction here in Australia. And we saw Mr Abbott, of course, his popularity dropped. There would have been 7.5% in the polls, which caused the change of leadership.
Turnbull hasn't introduced new policies. They're the same old Abbott policies, because the policies that are on the table are dreadful, and the things that they want to put on the table are not giving us any joy either. They are a pretty rotten government in terms of governance, as you've been talking about, Ken.
I've got with me right here Jeannie Ray, and she's the president of the NTEU, which is the National Tertiary Education Union. And on my right is Dr Ken Kogel from Monash University, specialising in governance.
One of the first things that Abbott did when he came in was close down a whole lot of advisory bodies which provide valuable information to ministers to help them make good policy decisions. Now we've got ministers having to rely on private consultants, which is all too frequent, and what's left of the public service. And of course that's been dramatically cut back.
The privatisation really opened the door to these corporations to be able to get traction and foot into owning and controlling very key strategic monetary concerns of the states.
So the effect is to actually weaken the whole structure of government, to weaken its capacity to speak up on behalf of people who aren't powerful enough to take their own voice to government or in the community, and to diminish the quality of governance of Australia generally.
They're trying to promote a debate about that trade union members shouldn't be allowed to encourage their co-workers to join a union.
Well, I mean, that's anti-constitutional, though.
That's pretty fundamental, isn't it?
Well, I mean, we'd have to say it's almost corrupt.
I don't get it. Who are the unions being corrupt with? Oh, well, where are the companies in this? Yeah, well, if there's deals and stuff going on, well, what about the companies? Why aren't they being prosecuted? Instead, you had...
And if they do decide they want to go for a double dissolution, it's actually going to be a very difficult thing to win, because they're effectively starting the campaign now. We've had the Prime Minister in South Australia this week campaigning to try and save seats in South Australian seats in the federal parliament. So what we're seeing is a downward spiral where Turnbull is cutting off all of his options, so it's making it a tighter and tighter spiral. And when it comes to the budget, 10th of May or whenever it happens to be, he'll find that there are very few decisions that he's been able to make, and so he won't be able to take a credible policy to the people, whether the election is on the 2nd of July or whether it's later in the year.
And we haven't even talked much about it, but the whole way they're looking at tax is about reinforcing privilege.
So there's a real corruption in the way in which our electoral system is operating here.
I think that's that. They don't care, and that's the only conclusion I can come to.
Well, we know who does care, and that's the public, and the public haven't had their say yet. They're going to have their say at the polls, and it's all in their hands, and we've seen governments tumble and governments fall.
It's GBB, yeah, you know me, rapping the NT streets, down the VIC, rapping it rapidly, attacking all the hip-hop beats. See what happens when you see indigenous MCs rock across the nation, hoping they get overseas, cause it's more than just a dream, plus we do this for our people, defeat for all the evil that we see every